To most Baltimoreans, the thought of swimming in the inner harbor is downright disgusting, but one group wants to make that a reality in less than a year. And I'm not just talking about crazy people who get dared to jump in the water. I'm talking about making the inner harbor a real sustainable and healthy and safe place to swim. In this video, we're going to look at if that's an actual possibility, and if so, what challenges need to be overcome in order to make it a reality. So for starters, where exactly are we talking about when we're talking about the inner harbor? Now, the inner harbor is both a neighborhood and a body of water, and for the purpose of this video, we're going to be focusing just on the body of water. And that body of water is the Patapsco River. It's one of the north branch of the Patapsco River. There's a couple other ones, but this is the one that runs right into the heart of downtown Baltimore. Due to its location right in the heart of the city, the inner harbor, the body of water, has had a huge impact on the city's development. It's played a key role in industry, military, and in tourism, particularly recently. Now, one of the downsides of this central location is how heavily polluted the inner harbor's been over the years. Centuries of being this close to this many people and this much industry have taken their toll on the waterway, which has, at times over the last 50 years, been considered one of the most polluted waterways in America. Despite all these problems, this is a problem that's slowly been improving, particularly over the past 5 or 10 years, as infrastructure improvements have led to a dramatic decrease in the amount of raw sewage that is overflowed into the inner harbor following rainstorms. But it's one thing to not dump raw sewage into the inner harbor, and it's a completely different thing to make it a place people would actually want to swim. So that brings us back to the question, is it almost swimmable? And if so, what still needs to be done to make it swimmable? When it comes to cleaning up the inner harbor, unquestionably the biggest issue is the sewage overflows. Now this diagram shows what happens, but basically when it rains, water infiltrates into the failing infrastructure through cracks and root holes and things like that. Then all this excess water that the system isn't designed for floods the system and pushes a combination of stormwater and sewage, and unfortunately a lot of times there's not enough room for it to go, and it either backs up or it floods out into waterways through structured overflows. This graphic right here shows the number and size of structured overflows between the years 2016 and 2018. As you can see, there's a ton of them, equaling millions of gallons of untreated water.
Officials say more than 4 million gallons of sewage and rainwater overflowed into a river as rain filled the sewer system. The city's Public Works Department says the sewage and rainwater mix was released Monday into the Jones Falls.
As long as something like this is going on at the scale that it used to be going on at, it's virtually impossible to have a swimmable inner harbor, because every time it rains you get thousands or even millions of gallons of untreated water and sewage being dumped into the inner harbor. Fortunately, over the past 10 years, there's been significant infrastructure projects that have taken place, and it's said that as of 2023, there's been a 96 to 97% reduction in these overflows. It's critical that the city and state keep this momentum going and keep making improvements on its infrastructure system. And possibly even more important than that is to keep maintaining the existing system, because a lack of maintenance is what led to this problem in the first place. So while this issue of sewage overflows isn't completely solved, it's well on its way to being addressed. Now, the second problem, and I would argue the second biggest problem, is current sources of pollution, particularly littering. Anyone who's been past the inner harbor knows that there's always floating debris and trash in there. And these contribute to the unhealthy environment, and they're not just an eyesore. So addressing them is really important to making the inner harbor a safe and healthy place to swim. One of the biggest things, and definitely from a PR standpoint, one of the most popular things that the city has been doing is the inner harbor trash wheels. The Baltimore trash wheels are several trash wheels, and as you can see on this page, it's got its own website. There's Mr. Trash Wheel and Professor Trash Wheel and a couple other ones, but basically they're solar and water wheel driven skimming devices that are strategically located at the mouth of inflows into the inner harbor. So then they funnel the trash using booms, and then they rake them up, they go up a conveyor belt, and then they dump them into a dumpster. And while this seems like sort of a novelty, and it certainly has been a PR thing, they've done a lot to skim out, because they put them at strategic locations where the water is dumping into the inner harbor. They're able to actually funnel off quite a bit of trash, and it's more than just a novelty. So here you can see in this video, these booms, they collect all the trash and debris, and then Mr. Trash Wheel scoops it all up and dumps it into the dumpsters, and then the dumpsters are taken away. So doing this is critical for keeping that surface debris and trash and other things like that out of the inner harbor. One of my favorite things about the trash wheels is that they actually report on a monthly basis, or actually a dumpster by dumpster basis, of everything that was pulled out of the water. So you can see, going back all the way to 2014, there's thousands of plastic bottles and plastic wrappers, and then you can see the different trash wheels as they've brought more online, and you can see which ones are the most effective, and probably a lot of this has to do with where they're located. As you can see, Mr. Trash Wheel was the original, and not surprisingly, it looks like he's pulling out the most. But you have these other ones: Professor Trash Wheel, Captain Trash Wheel, and Gwenda Trash Wheel, whatever that is. But it's just neat to see all the totals, and it gives you an idea for the scale of how much of an impact these trash wheels are having. This issue of littering and residential pollution, while it may not be completely solved, there's certainly being steps taken to address it. And that brings us to our last, and I would argue the most challenging issue, and that's legacy industrial pollution. One of the best things about Baltimore is also one of its worst things, and that's its heavy manufacturing and industrial history. It's great because of the impact that it had on the growth of America, but the downside is you have decades and decades and centuries of pollution. And going back prior to, a few decades ago, the environmental standards were far more lax than they are now. And unfortunately, a lot of the pollution that took place, we're still able to feel the effects of it. Things like heavy metals and other toxins can stick around for a really long time. So dealing with those is one of the most daunting challenges to getting a swimmable harbor. There's been some remediation efforts. Unfortunately, most remediation is super expensive, and it's questionable how much it really helps. A lot of times particularly things like heavy metals, one of the best courses of actions is to just kind of let it be and don't stir it up, because if you just let it be where it is, it'll get buried, and its impacts can be not as great. On the flip side, sometimes this isn't always possible because of things like boat traffic and construction, and other things can stir up old legacy toxins and pollutants. So dealing with these, it's got to be done sort of on a case-by-case basis, and it needs to be done with sort of a holistic view of what's the best way to clean it up or protect the public from these toxins and pollutants. It can't always just be about what's the cheapest thing to do, because some of these things are pretty dangerous and can have pretty negative impacts. So one of the most expensive cases of this, but I would say sort of a model for other instances to base their work on, is Harbor Point, right off the inner harbor. It was the site of a former chromium plant and other heavy industry, and they spent tens of millions of dollars to put a cap on the site, and then built off of that, with the idea being the cap contains most of the toxins and pollutants, and makes the site safe to build without stirring things up further. Baltimore has lost much of its heavy industry, so a lot of these problems aren't as severe in the present tense, but because they happened for decades and decades and decades, going back to the 1700s, we're still dealing with it. But over time, as we get removed from the days of polluting and not really caring about what we're doing to the waterways and to the environment and stuff like that, I think these will naturally start to improve just as things sort of dissipate. So now to bring it all back to the original question, will the Inner Harbor be swimmable in 2024? Really the answer is kind of, and that's probably not the answer people want, but it depends on the situation. It depends on where you're swimming. It depends on if it rained recently, because even in the last few years, statistics have come out saying that between rainstorms, somewhere between 80 and 85% of the time, from a bacterial level standpoint, the Inner Harbor is technically swimmable. So in the right conditions, at the right times, it's a long way away from people regularly swimming laps across the Inner Harbor, which I think is unlikely, but it will be swimmable technically some of the time if the right precautions are taken. So, but to zoom out one step further than that, I think the bigger issue or the bigger positive in all this is the improvement that has been made. It's gone from a place that people wouldn't dare swim in, except for crazy people like that one lady that jumped in, to now it's something that's a viable possibility in the not too distant future. So all in all, things are improving, and hopefully they'll continue to improve.